Hi, this is part 5 of our rebuilding of a 1930s NuTone chime. In part 4, we disassembled the 2-note chime base, and now in part 5, we're going to finish the servicing of the base, and then we're going to reassemble it. So what we're going to start with is we're going to clean the solenoids and the plungers so we can reassemble them, put the springs back on, because we need to do that before we put the resonating tubes and tone bars back on. The first thing we need to do is clean the tubes inside the solenoids. This is the front door, this is the rear door, and in the center of it is most likely a brass tube. And what happens to these are they get dirty and oxidized and gummy, and then the plungers don't slide through them freely, and then this chime doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and it doesn't sound right. As with anything this old, everything is very fragile and everything is irreplaceable, and you have to do everything as carefully as you possibly can to make sure you don't wreck it because there's no parts to replace it with. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean the inside of the solenoid bores with a little bit of 1500 grit wet dry sandpaper. And I've cut some pieces here of the right size. Normally, and I've shown this in other videos, lots of times what I'll do is I'll wrap the sandpaper around a pencil and put it in and use it as a sort of a probe kind of thing to clean it back and forth. However, these really early NuTone chimes, the diameter of the solenoid bore is too small for a pencil. It won't fit. So on cases like this, I have this little plastic rod that I bought. Here's the other end of it. It's a piece of carbon fiber rod because that's what they had when I went there to get it. And then I took it and I very carefully spun it in a cordless drill with some sandpaper and shrunk down the diameter because the stock size, while it does go in, it's a tight fit and it doesn't leave much room for the sandpaper, which you have to wrap around this. So I reduced the diameter of the rod a little bit to make it easier to do. What you want is you take your wet dry sandpaper and first you take it and carefully roll it around the rod like this to sort of shape it. And when you cut the sandpaper, you don't want to make it too wide because when you wrap it around the rod, you don't want it to overlap too much because then you're increasing the diameter of the whole assembly here and it makes it too hard to get inside the solenoid bore. Once you've done that, you can very carefully insert it, and once you get it started, in fact I'm going to roll this the other way. I prefer to roll it counterclockwise, that's just me. And then we'll insert it in here. Sometimes that's a little tricky. So if it's hard to get in, then what you can do is you can roll this up because now it will be easy because it's already sort of cylindrical shape. And you can insert it in here. And then you can insert the rod inside of it. Now, when we do this, the coils are in these little brackets here on the ends, right here. And they're held in place well enough for what they need to be for what the chime does, but with all this manipulating we're going to do, you don't want to pop it loose and have it fall and jerk on the wires and tear the covering and make a big mess out of it, because the point here is to make it all better, not to make it worse. So all of this you have to do and be very careful about it. Once you have the rod and sandpaper inserted into the solenoid bore, all you're going to do is very carefully do this. You're honing and cleaning out the brass tube. And how much do you have to do this? Some. Enough so that it's clean. And what you'll find is as you work on it, we pull this out and we unwrap the sandpaper, you can see, probably, the brass residue in the sandpaper from honing the inside of the brass tube. So that gives you some idea that it actually is working. The other thing that you can do is sometimes you've got to work it on both sides, like this. to make sure you get the whole thing clean. And you want to be careful because as I do this, if you watch the coil, you can see it wiggle around a lot, and if I twist the rod, you'll see the coil turn. You don't want to do that because the wires that make up the coil are very fine, and eventually they come out through the wrapping and they're connected down here. And if you twist it around and start to tear it and make it all fall apart, then you've got a bigger project on your hand. So you want to kind of hold it and do this carefully. The other thing I like to do is we're going to use a little bit of our Zippo lighter fluid. You know, the kind that I tell you in all the Chime videos to use. Not barbecue lighter fluid, not WD-40, not paint thinner, not lacquer thinner, not any of those kind of things. Definitely not graphite, definitely not grease. Just some good old-fashioned Zippo, or if you can't find Zippo, Ronson's okay too, lighter fluid. I bought this at a local wine and cigar store in our town, and it cost me a total of $3.99. And the guy was really happy to sell it to me because I told him what I use it for. And first he looked confused, and then he said, well, that seems like a worthwhile thing to do. He gave me a good deal on it. And I actually bought 6 of them. I like to have a lot. So what you can do is you can take this and you can squirt a little bit into the solenoid bore and then work it around. Sometimes when you do that, it gives it a little bit of lubrication, I guess, and it makes it slide in and out easier. Now, what I do is I look down inside, which I can't really show you because it's too small and too hard to see, but you can see that it's shiny inside. The other thing I like to do when I get to the point where I think it's pretty good is I take a little piece of cloth and I put a little lighter fluid on it. Then I use one of these little brush things that I have here at the shop for cleaning stuff, and you take it and you push it through. It's sort of like cleaning the barrel of your gun or something like that. You push it through, comes out the other side, and it cleans off all of the gunk that was left inside. And if you want to be real specific about it, you can take another one, put a little lighter fluid on it, and push that one through. And see, that one came through and it's pretty clean. So that means that we cleaned off all the residue inside. And if I look down inside, I can almost see myself. It's so shiny. How about that? So that one's done. I think we did pretty well on that. I'm going to do the second one now. Trim my sandpaper, the width of it down just a little bit, so it all just fits in just right. Alright, so we'll put this in like this. Okay. It's a little tricky. You have to take your time. There's no rush. If you're in a hurry, you got to go somewhere, do it another day. Alright, so now we'll do this one. See, it's not complicated. You can sit here, you can have your favorite music on, you can be watching some series on Netflix, all that kind of stuff. Get your favorite beverage, adult or otherwise. Put a little lighter fluid on here. Like that. Now, we can't really do this side easily because this stop right here that you can't see is in the way, but I think that we probably got it pretty well. So we'll take our cloth, we'll put a little more lighter fluid on it, and we'll clean the bore out, see what we get. Yep. See, that was clean when it went in, and see how dirty it is now. So we'll take a second one, cut another little piece here. Push that through. And that came out pretty clean. So I'm pretty happy with that. The real test on this will be once we get the plungers cleaned up, how well they slide through it. One of the other things we're going to do now, because it's a good time to do it, is we've got the remnants of two little pieces of low voltage wire connected to two of the terminals from when the Chime was installed in someone's home. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these out, because these aren't doing anybody any good. These are not original. This would have been the low voltage wiring that the electrician or someone would have installed when they put the Chime in. We'll get rid of those. And then we have this sort of gnarlied up little grommet right here, which is really hard and broken and mangled up. So we're just going to pull that out. And we're going to put a nice new grommet in place. In fact, it's kind of interesting because there's two holes here. So maybe they gave you extra holes for extra wires. It is a two-door Chime, so in theory you could have a total of 4 wires. So tell you what, let me get another grommet. Alright, so now we've got two nice modern replacement grommets to pull our low voltage wires through, and that should be good. So this is pretty much done for now, at least until we put it back together and see how it works. So let's go ahead and take a look at our plungers. Okay, so here are our two plungers. The top plunger is the front door plunger, so it's ding and dong, and the bottom one is our rear door plunger. And as you can see, they're very rusted and corroded and in really bad shape. And if you remember from part 4, they were a little hard to get out of the solenoids. We have to be really careful with these, because these really early NuTone plunger assemblies, the tips on them here, here, and here, these are made out of wood. If you break them, replacing them is not easy to do. If you want to replace them with wood, you could replace them with plastic tips, but that kind of defeats the whole point of what we're doing here. So we're going to do these really carefully by hand, and I'm going to do one of them to show you how I do it, and then I'll probably do the other one off camera, because if you see me do one, you should be able to follow along. So let's get set up and we'll get started. And yes, I am going to do the front door one that has the 2 wooden tips. Yes, it is a harder one to do, so if you see me do the harder one first, then when you have to do yours, it should be about the same. So all we're going to do with this, now I have showed how to clean these in many other videos, and on really much more modern ones that are much more sturdy and have plastic tip that are way less breakable than these are, you'll see me put these in a chuck of a cordless drill and spin them and clean them up that way. We're not going to do that here. Much too risky. Whatever kind of wood this is, it's relatively easy to break, and you don't want to know why I know that. So we're not going to take the chance, because if something were to happen then and we break it off, then the project becomes way more complicated than I care for it to be. So all we're going to do with these to start with is we're going to take some 1000 grit sandpaper, because that's a good to start with, and we're going to sit here very carefully, and we're going to sand it. Ooh, look, there's a shiny spot. Did you see it? See the shiny spot? How long is this going to take to do? And here's some of the rust. It's not going to take that long. When these were new, and when you clean a lot of these like I do, you realize that when you're done, they should be shiny like that. Can you see the shininess? Maybe. And it doesn't really take that long. I'm not going to put anything on these, at least not for the time being. I definitely would never put, I've seen a lot of people come up with a lot of interesting ideas on what you can do, thinking that it's going to make it easier and faster. And you don't want to use anything, you don't want to use any kind of chemicals or anything that might affect the wood. The tips are what we care about. The steel rod, nothing's going to really go wrong with that. So I've seen people, I had a fellow recently, he sent me a message. He said he watched one of the videos, and he cleaned his plungers and he cleaned his solenoid bores, but he decided to do it with steel wool, and I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go. I think it's messy. Plus, you know, this is the way I was taught to do it, and it seems to work fairly well. What will happen with the sandpaper is eventually it gets all gummed up with stuff from the sanding. Now, you can easily take it out, and because it is wet dry sandpaper, you could take it out and rinse it out and get most of the residue out of it, but it's such a small, tiny piece, and it's not expensive, and I don't really feel like getting up to do that. It's just easier to sit here and go round and round and clean it up. So 1/2 of it, roughly, is just about done. And we'll flip it over. And we'll do the rest. This is probably by far the most exciting YouTube part of a video that you've watched in a long time. Okay, that's pretty good. A few little spots on the first end, so we'll go around one more time. That's pretty good. Now, on the end right here, right there, there's a groove. The groove is where the end, the smallest end of the spring, snaps in to hold it in place. That little groove tends to get filled up with crud over time, and so what you can do is you take a little small flat screwdriver and you can sort of clean it out a little like that, and then we'll take our sandpaper and we'll fold it over to a fairly unused spot, and you can take the folded side and you can just clean it out just a little more, because you only really want to do this once, like that. That looks good. It's nice and clean. So now what we're going to do, we're going to put a little lighter fluid on it. We're back to our Zippo again, and all I'm going to do is put a little bit on the metal, and I'm not going to flood it because I don't want to get it on the wood. I just want to get it on the metal. And then we'll wipe it down carefully, and as you can see on the rag, there was some residue. Now the real test on this is, how does it fall through the solenoid? Because that's the part that matters. Does it slide through freely? Now to do this, I'm going to put my finger down here because I don't want it sliding out and hitting the workbench and hitting the metal, the wooden tip. I want to catch it so we don't want to accidentally break it. When you put this in here, when you let it go, it should simply fall through. Like that. Let's do that again. Like that. If it falls through freely, that's clean enough. And maybe one of those was in slow motion. So that's how we cleaned the plunger. Now I'm going to stop the video, or not. Maybe we'll just make you sit there and watch me do this. So now we'll do this one. This is the rear door plunger. So we'll take our sandpaper. See, this one should only take half as long, because you only have to do, well, it's about the same length. So I guess it'll take just about as long. This one actually seems to be a lot more corroded or has a lot more rust on it than the other one did. Maybe because, see, maybe in the original installation they didn't use the rear door and it just sat there for 80 years slowly rusting. It's not a bad thing to do the end either, even though it doesn't have anything to do with how it works or how it sounds. But you know, if you're going to clean it up, you might as well do it all. Alright, so that's nice and clean. We'll clean out the little groove like that. We'll take our piece of folded sandpaper that we use on the other one. And we'll clean out the groove a little more. That one wasn't really that bad. And then we'll take our lighter fluid and we'll clean the rod just a little bit. About the same amount. And now that one's done. Is it good enough? Well, we'll give it the test and see. Line it up and drop it. And it falls right through. Just like that. That's the way it should be. So now what we get to do is we get to reassemble these, the plungers and the springs, back into the solenoids. Since this is a two-door chime, the front door is ding and dong, and the rear door is one note, it's just ding. And there's this stop right here that when the spring pulls the plunger back in, it hits this so it doesn't hit the other tone bar. On this little bracket right here, there was some kind of stock material. I don't know what it was made out of exactly. Could have been cloth, could have been something else. It's kind of lost to time. So we need to replace that because it wasn't very good. And what I like to use for those is one of these. This is just one of those felt dots that you buy at the hardware store that you put on the corner of your kitchen cabinet door so when you close it, it doesn't go bang. And it's got a little self-adhesive thing on it. And all you got to do is stick it on like that. Easy peasy. So let's do the rear door first. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our rear door plunger and we're going to insert it into the solenoid like this with the grooved end here. See, and when the spring pushes this back, it's going to hit it so you don't hear it go clank against the metal. And then we're going to take the spring and we have to fit the spring over it and work the small end of the spring, the smallest coil, we have to work it back into the groove on the end of the plunger. And I'm going to need my magnifiers for that so I can actually see it. And I'll do this one this way, and then the second one you get to see it more close up. So all you have to do is sort of work it around and around, and it snaps in the groove. And now it works. Sometimes what will happen is the smallest end of the coil of the spring, the part that fits in the groove, this part right here, if it's a little stretched out of shape, it's not easy to, like, people think you can take like a pair of needle nose pliers and bend it back around and make it smaller, which maybe sometimes you can, but it won't be perfectly round and it won't fit in the groove as well as you would like. And then sometimes what happens is when it's energized and it pulls it this way, there's enough tension against it that it could pop out of the groove, and you don't want that. So what you can do in those kind of cases, this is kind of a workaround, you use some of this. This is Loctite super glue, and it's the gel type. It's ultra gel control. And when I buy this, I buy like 6 or 8 at a time, so I always have them. And what you can do is you can take it and you put one little bit over the spring where it fits into the groove. Just, you don't go all the way around, you don't need a lot, just a little bit to fill it in, and then it'll set up and dry, and it'll hold the spring in the groove, no problem. So that's just a little tip that you can follow if you have a spring issue. The second one goes together the same way. You put the plunger in the solenoid with the groove on this end, and you take your spring and you put it over the plunger, and I'll let you see how it sort of goes back together. Alright, that's as close as I can get zoomed in on it. So what you do is you kind of pull the spring back with your fingers a little bit, don't stretch it or bend it, and then you take your little tiny screwdriver and you sort of pull it back one coil at a time till you get towards the very end, and then you pull it back, and if you need to, you can always rotate it to get to the side that you can't see, and you very carefully just work it up onto the end of the plunger, the goal being to get the very smallest coil into the groove, like I almost have it, like that. You could, in this case, since this one actually comes out like this, you could actually put the spring on first if you want to, and then insert it into the solenoid, but that wouldn't have been as good, so I didn't do it that way. Alright, so there's that, and that slides nice and freely. If you go back and review part 4, you'll see how they didn't slide freely and how hard it was to get them out. Now that we have our solenoid assembly put back together, it's also referred to as the power unit assembly. That's later, but that's what we call it. Now we have to reassemble our resonating tubes and our tone bars. If you recall, these looked really awful when we took them out off the unit in part 4. Here's a picture of what they look like. And I spent about an hour and a half on each one with my Brasso, and I polished and polished and polished and polished until now they're all nice and shiny. The tone bars were just simply washed and cleaned to get the grime off of them, and I did clean the little acorn nuts that hold everything together. Surprisingly enough, these are not brass. These are actually, look like they're nickel plated, so they're probably steel, and we can actually tell that because if we get one of our magnets and we go like that, no, they're not. They're not steel, they're made out of something else, but they're not brass, and I would have guessed they were, but they aren't. We have to put this back together, and if you recall, when we took them apart, the rubber grommets that held the tone bars onto the threaded screws on the resonators, they were in really, really bad shape. Grommets are really, really complicated. The world of grommets is vast, and there are probably literally a million different kinds of grommets made in the world. And grommets have all kinds of unique measurements and specifications when you try to choose one. You have the total outside diameter, you have the diameter of the hole in the middle, you have the total thickness of the grommet, you have the thickness of the slot in the grommet, you have the diameter of the hole of the ridge, the round part inside the slot. There's all these measurements. And you can try really, really, really hard to find the world's most perfect grommet for your application, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to fail. It's really hard to come up with just the right one, and when you think you just found the right one, and then you order 12 of them to see, and then they come in and there's something about it isn't right. So it's complicated. And especially today, because our ability to go out and hunt down grommets locally, which is the easiest way to do it, is limited because, you know, we're all sheltering in place. So what I'm going to do with these are a common grommet that we use on a lot of NuTone chimes because they fit a lot of different applications. However, this is not a good choice for this project because these grommets are too big. And they fit, you can get them into the holes of the tone bar if you try really, really, really hard, and you can get them sort of squeezed in there, but they hold the tone bars too tightly, and it affects how it sounds. This is like the art of what they came up with. The tone bars have to be isolated from the other metal parts of the resonator, otherwise you get that jangly sound, it doesn't sound right. They have to be loose enough so the grommets and the attaching hardware doesn't affect the sound of the tone bar, but they can't be too loose that then they want to flop around too much. And it's a very fine line, and it's not easy to do. There are many different attachment methods that NuTone used over the years, and it's not very consistent sometimes. You can look at chimes all made from roughly the same period of time, and each model has a somewhat different type of attachment method. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do something that I found. I sort of rifled through some of the grommets that I had, and I found these four. And these are much smaller than that one, but these are going to work out all right. And yes, I did try because I was playing around to see what would work. These will fit into the little holes in the tone bars reasonably well, like that. They're a little bit small. The overall diameter is a little small, but we have a way we're going to work around that. So what we're going to do in this case, so I guess what I'm really telling you is if you do this yourself and you have to replace the grommets, you're on your own. You're going to have to find grommets that will work, and you're going to have to be as clever as you possibly can be to figure out how to make it all go together. So what I'm doing in this case is I'm taking our grommets that are, by all account, a little bit too small, but not too bad, and put them on the threaded rods first. And then I'm going to very carefully work the tone bars down over the grommets. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because if you put the grommets in the tone bars first and then try to push them down over the threaded rods, the threads of the rods grip onto the inside hole of the grommet too much, and then it just pulls out of the tone bar hole. So that's sort of defeats the whole point here. So if we do it like this, and we make sure that we get the grommet through as much as possible, they can be like that. Now, when you do something like this, what this is really all about is, what does it sound like? Because that's what really matters. So if you take something like this and you go like this, you should be able to have a sense of whether you think that sounds all right or not. If it goes thunk, 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 or clunk, 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 or heaven forbid you have that jangly sound, it's probably not the best way to go. Now, my concern on this is we don't want these to pop loose at any point, and we are going to put the acorn nuts on, but I want it to be a little more secure than that, and I don't want the acorn nuts, I don't want this too loose. I want the grommet really held in place. So what I'm going to do in this case, just because I think it's a good idea, is I'm going to take a couple little brass washers that are about the same size as the actual grommets, and I'm going to put them on top of the grommets and under the acorn nuts. Like that. Is it going to really make that much difference? I don't know. Does it make me feel better because I did that? Absolutely. Alright, now, see? That doesn't sound good at all. That sounds terrible. So we'll back these off just a little bit. And that's not bad, but still maybe not quite as good as I would like. Okay, that's much better. So let's try it without the washers. Because no, I didn't try the washers before. You get to see this happen live. Unless, of course, you're watching it when it's been recorded, then you're not watching it live. So let's try it without those. Put these back on. We'll finger tighten them for now. Alright, we'll go washer free because that seems to be the best way to do it. So there's one. And now we'll do the second one. Same way. Grommets go on first. Tone bars go on next. Now, one of the things that you can tell is, I know that the short tone bar went on the right because that's in the other video. But which side does it go on? Does it go this way or does it go that way? And does it even make a difference? Probably not. But if you look right here, you can see the two black dots. That's where the wooden tips have struck the tone bar a million times until today. So if you're going to put it back together, you might as well put it back together the way it was. And we'll push this down. And we'll try to get it to snap over the end of the grommet. That. It's always very satisfying when you monkey around with this, and finally the grommet pops up, the last little bit pops up through the opening, and it's in place. Alright, so there's that one, and we'll listen to it. And then we'll put our acorn nuts on. And I don't think the acorn nuts have to be super tight, just finger tight is probably fine. Like that. So there's our tone bars. Now what we get to do is we get to put our tone bars back on the bass. Putting the tone bars back on the bass will be easy because all you have to do is put the other threaded rods through the holes. Of course you need your attaching hardware, and if you're smart, where is it? Oh, it's in a cup. Why is it in the cup? Because that's why I put it in part 4, and it's been in a cup ever since the end of part 4 because that way I didn't lose them. Are you part of that club? Do you have your attaching parts, or have you misplaced them by now? If you have, I don't know what to tell you. Alright, so all we have is a washer. There's a star washer. I'll get each one started and then I'll show you the second one. Because if you twist this around too much, then the plungers are going to fall out, and then if they roll on the floor, then you run the risk of breaking the wooden tips. And the whole point of a lot of this was not to break anything. So we'll do that one. We'll put this one here. And now we'll turn it around because now the plungers can't fall out. And all you have to do is you put your star washer and you put your nut back on. Like this. And you use your nut driver. Because see, NuTone was considerate enough that the size of the nuts here are the same size as the acorn nuts, because I assume that when somebody was sitting at the factory on 3rd and Eggleston Avenue in Cincinnati, Ohio, back in the 30s, they only needed one tool to put it together, not two. More efficient that way. And there's our chime. It's been reassembled. So our plungers should move freely. That one doesn't count because you can't really ring it that way. So now what we need to do is, I guess we need to hook it up and see if it works. So I have it temporarily set up. I have power to it. I have it wired for both the front and the rear door buttons. So let's go ahead and ring the front door first because that's the money, don't you think? And that sounds really nice. Now we'll go ahead and ring the rear door. And I would say that it works exactly like it's supposed to. It resonates really nicely. The tone carries for a long time once the plunger has hit the tone bar, and it's in good working order now. So that's the end of part 5. There will be a part 6. Part 6 will be the final reassembly and formal testing of the chime with the clock in place and so on and so on. I hope that you found this series to be interesting so far. One more part to go. That'll be the payoff at the end. If you liked this video and you found it interesting or it helped you in some way, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.